Planning a project, designing a project is a big deal. And I probably obsess a little too much. And occasionally my planning is not what I hoped. But on this gate project, which is now significantly welded together, I've solved a couple of puzzles, I think. I've got the attachment point, the electromagnet enclosure is built. I think it's right. The hinges are understood, they're attached. I think they're right. The main framework has been built to, I think, just about the dimension and the degree of squareness that it needs to be, and the welds look pretty good. So what I have to solve now is how to build the frameworks for the little panels that go into these openings that are going to receive the cedar boards that are going to really create most of the appearance of this whole operation. Let's get at it. So the framework is built, including these window shapes. These actually have the same vertical dividers that are represented over here. And so what I'm going to start right now is the angle iron frames that go inside of these openings and have to fit and have to look right and have to receive the Western red cedar boards that I'm going to be cutting, I don't know, maybe in a couple weeks. So this is the first prototype of the frame to go in. Let me show you what I've done and what I decided to change. So these frameworks have got to be very close to the same size, and they've got to be repeatable. So that means there's got to be a jig built. You've heard me say before that anytime you've got to build more than two of something, you better take a minute and make a jig. So I've been kind of agonizing over the jig to build and the process to use on these things. This one was the first one I did. And I thought, well, being a carpenter, I'm going to try mitering these corners. You know, making a 45-degree cut, knowing that in my limited fabricating experience, 45s are hard to cut through steel with the bandsaws that I have without getting some, I mean, the saw tends to want to drift, right, towards the heel of the cut usually. And so sure enough, not only were these joints ugly, though the weld would fill it, but it's just harder to make the outside dimension remain accurate, or at least it is for me. So I went to a different method, very similar to the joint that I made on the top corners of the frame with the 3x3 tubing. Where I just notch out one of the pieces of angle. I think it's going to be a little more worthwhile. I think the welds will be more consistent, and I think it's going to drop into the jig and be very repeatable. So the jig is simple. It is 1/2x2 bar stock. I cut 3 2-foot pieces, and I am log cabining the corners. That is, you let one run by, the next one butts and runs by, the next one butts and runs by, the last one butts and runs by. It works in concrete form, so I figured why wouldn't it work in a fabrication jig? The upshot is, fits pretty nice, lifts out pretty well, and if I turn it 90 degrees, it fits just as well, which must mean that the jig is square. So now I'm going to tack this jig to the table. And for a carpenter, it's the same dynamic as building concrete forms. You darn sure better tack it hard enough that it's not going to move midstream, and it makes no sense to weld it down so hard that you never get it torn off. So that happy medium between enough and too much is sometimes a little hard to hit. I think she's going to work. So here's how I hope this is going to work. I'll drop the pieces in here, tack, 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 and I will take these little pieces of 1¼ by 3/8, lay them in against those stops, tack them to the frames, take them out, weld them off, and hope that they fit. This saw is an abrasive cutoff saw. I think these discs are called carborundum, but I'm not sure. And it used to be just the thing as far as I was concerned, and now with other tools and equipment I realize it's dirty, it's noisy, the dust is something that freaks me out, the sparks go everywhere, but sometimes it's just the tool for the job. Grinding off the sharp edges after you cut a piece of steel is just a good policy, all the time. It makes the fit up better, which makes the weld cleaner, and the fingers that do not get cut by those little razor blades could be yours. So this right here is the critical dimension, or at least the one that's not already sort of specified by the jig itself. I need 20 inches. There it is. As with so many other things, once you've got it figured out and working, it's hard to remember exactly why you had to sort of be so anxious about whether or not it would ever work. But I think this is working pretty well. I've got 2 more of these things to put together. Then I'm going to grind the welds off the face of these frames just so they're smooth. I don't want any attention to be drawn to the corners of these. I want these things to sort of disappear and just be presenting the cedar boards that are going to be held and protected and sort of made permanent inside of these things. 2 more of this size and then 8 twice as big, and I'll be ready to start putting the straps and the threaded openings and the other details that have to be put in before they're painted, before I put the boards in. I always forget to keep the nozzle cleaned out so the gas flows evenly. I think I probably need to replace that pretty soon, but let's keep moving. Lightly tacked, weld it off. This fabrication table is just fantastic. It's made of 6 by 6 by 3/8 wall wide flange beam that's 100% welded off and then somehow has been machined flat. I've never seen another one like it, and a lot of other people haven't either. But boy, am I thankful to have it. You know, it doesn't seem to make much difference if you're cutting rafters or building cabinets or furniture or, I speculate a lot of other crafts that have to be fastened together. Dry fitting is important, and that is you want to make sure the pieces are going to fit and line up and be straight and be what you want before you glue them or nail them or weld them into place. All right, I've got some confidence now that these 20 by 20s, that's the size of the opening, these are 17 1/4 square, are going to drop in, and these little tabs are going to give me a welding connection. It's going to work good. Now I'm going to put these little flat bars on the back, because the lumber that slides in here is going to tuck up under the top and then drop into the bottom. These things will keep the top and bottom from vibrating out. I'm going to leave a little weep hole, no contact along here, and hopefully Curtis will be able to get the paint in there just fine. Last step, then we start on the big ones. Not perfect, but gonna be all right. So as I started welding these last two pieces of bar stock onto these panels, it occurred to me that each of these frames consists of 12 different pieces of steel and 32 different welds. And I know that a real fabricator would have used a much more efficient process to get this done than I guess I am. But between this table and wooden spacers and vice grip clamps, I think I'm finally getting a handle on this project. Well, I've spent way too long and probably worked myself up into a lather way too much. But it's time to install these little picture frames in these openings, and so far the signs are auspicious. I think maybe it's going to work out. I'm just throwing a piece of OSB up underneath, clamping it in place, because the back of these goes down to the plane of the back of these 2x2 pickets. Tack them in here on these little standoffs, spacing them off the sides of the openings with these gauge blocks, close counts. But I want to make sure that this top reveal, the top space down the top of these openings, is as straight as I can make it, because this is essentially eye level. And whether or not you'll be able to see the vertical spacings for regularity or the ones intermediate is not as likely as being able to sight that one down the top. And Kenny told me, just lean a 2x4 up against the opening, and if somebody comes up and starts scrutinizing it and finding fault, just give them a little tap on the side of the head to teach them a little more respect. Well, the fact is, I'm a carpenter first, carpenter longer, and so I use, anytime I can, junk, leftover plywood or lumber to make my jigs and the templates that I need to make sure I'm getting something correct. And so it's no different this time. I'm making a piece of OSB, junk OSB, that is exactly the size of the outside of these lower frames, and then I will transfer from the wood template, extending the template that I used for the upper frames to where I'm just sure that we have square and the right dimension, and we will press ahead. Okay, that's the size, and I think it's reliable. I've got to locate two attachment points just like this right down here, and I think we're going to be ready to get to work if I can get this thing out of here. Yep, look at that. I was measuring and marking every one of these, and then I realized I can just use the edge of the table as a gauge, come out 1/4 of an inch, works great. So I didn't know until a few days ago with this project that you could buy short coupling nuts. Shorts. Now here's a 5/8 coupling nut, and the proportion is way longer as a function of the diameter than this 3/8 short coupling nut, which is 1 inch, 1.1 inch, I guess, long. Perfect for what I need for securing the boards into these frames. Live and learn. These things are labor intense. I've got 6 more of them. I think it'll probably take me 4 hours, maybe 5 hours to get them all in and polished up where I polish them and everything in the right spot. But I can't rush it because if they're wrong, I throw them away and then there you go. So anyway, the jigs I think are working. The clamps are beautiful. The welder's set about right. All that I lack is ambition. Well, I'm down to the bitter end on tacking these frameworks in here, and I'm glad. I think I've been trying to keep track of the time. I think it's taken me almost 2 hours for each one of these, from cutting out the material and sanding off the mill scale and making sure it fits and, you know, sort of amortizing the time it's spent to build the jig and going through all of this. It's taken a long time, but we're down to the very end of it. So I take these 1.25 inch spacers. Southern Yellow Pine came from Andrew Larson in one of his hammer shipments. And I drop it in here, clamp it loosely just to hold it over against the side. Check the fit up, it's very close. We're gonna put another one right there. So I know it's parallel, the space is good. So now short tacks at the top, so when I turn it over and finish welding from the back, the top will be sealed off when the vertical beads come down and close up the edges of the tack. I'm not lying. I'm gonna be darn glad when this thing's put together. Well, that's it. The frames are in place. I can weld off the interior 6. I'll weld off the 2 ends after I get that arched piece bent the hard way. That's gonna be a challenge. I've never done it. I think I have a plan. And the only reason I have any hope is because of a man named John Adolph. He's 96. He's one of the most amazing men on the planet. I got to interview him up in Vancouver last summer, and I'm going to bring that interview to you very soon. But in the meantime, stand by for some heat shrinking and bending. I'll put my head down and make about 150 little welds on these things. 150 welds. What was I thinking when I designed this? I don't know. It's just work. There's always work. And work is one of the things in this life that is worthwhile. Thanks for watching Essential Craftsman. Keep up the good work.